Guys, I am hosting a conference this summer called NephCon right here in my hometown of Bozeman, Montana. NephCon is taking place from the 27th through the 28th of June and will feature powerful presentations from myself, Gary Haven, Mike Adams, and David Paulides, with special guest appearances by Keith from End Times Productions and Taylor Welch from the Deep End Podcast. We will be discussing an array of topics related to Nephilim, UFOs, alien abduction, transhumanism, artificial intelligence, the missing 411 phenomenon, Bigfoot, and Bible prophecy. If you want to come to NephCon, you can get tickets at alberinoevents.com. Bozeman, Montana is drop dead gorgeous at this time of year. We have some of the best camping, hiking, and fishing in America. And we are the gateway to Yellowstone National Park. So come out with your families and friends to enjoy the beauty of the Rocky Mountains and to join me for this epic event. alberinoevents.com. Get your tickets today.
And we're just going to get on into it because I can't wait to catch up with our good friend Timothy here. Now, Timothy Alberino he is an explorer, he is an author, and we haven't seen him in a while. His best-selling book, Birthright, offers a revolutionary perspective on the biblical narrative, which is helping to inform and expand the paradigms of Christians living in an age of artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and UFO disclosure. We've been talking about that lately a lot. He has traveled around the world, recently just getting back into the States. Can't wait to talk about that one. Traveling around the world investigating theories in alternative history, the mystery of the megalith builders, the mythologies of ancient giants, and various aspects of the UFO phenomenon. He's hosted, produced, and directed several documentary films related to these topics, and is frequently featured in television programs and podcast interviews. Tonight, I think it's going to be like his 9th time on this show, and we've had a lot of fun hanging out over the years. Timothy, welcome back. How you been?
Hey, Frank, as always, it's great to be with you.
Oh, man. First of all, like I said in the opening, hats off to whoever designed the set at the Michael Knowles show, because you guys sitting in there looking like it was like you were in the middle of the ruins right there. So that was wonderful. Was that all? Was that practical, or is there a lot of green screening going on?
The foreground was all props. The background was green screens. They have like a 3-paneled green screen that they can change out, and they were showing me the different sets that they built, and phenomenal. I mean, it's the best. These are the best sets I've ever seen over the Daily Wire. So very, very impressive work by those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fine. Hold on, let me just put it up for the on the screen for a second. Like, here's one shot for you, and I said, and at every angle of the room, I said, "Damn." Then again, they got the money to spend over there, so might as well dollar.
They put a lot of work into it, yeah,
for sure.
And we got to smoke cigars the whole time we were talking, so that was great.
When I watched a little bit of it, it made me really excited for the next 4 to 6 weeks over here when we finally get into 60-degree weather. I can't go outside and smoke a cigar with my shoulders up by my ears. I got to be able to relax, and you guys look like you were having a good time, so that was nice.
It was a very good time, very enjoyable interview.
Well, you just got back from Peru. How long ago now?
I've been back a week. I think I've been back for a week or so. I got back a little over a week. I got back on the 4th.
It was another good one, I hear, because this not only had to do with new megalithic discoveries down there, but also some mummies. What was the basis of the expedition?
So I wanted to go investigate an alleged newly discovered megalithic site called Kapuli. And also I had been invited by professors from the University of Ica to come and examine the tridactyl mummies, the so-called alien mummies in Peru. And it just so happened that I'm also being featured in a documentary that's being produced by Mike Cernovich, and his crew wanted to go down with me. He and his crew wanted to accompany me to Peru to film some stuff related to my part in their film. And so I got to hang out with Mike Cernovich and just an excellent film crew. we went up the river Masan. I have a lot of history up that river. It's a tributary to the Napo, which is, of course, itself a tributary to the Amazon. And we went to see if the family that I lived with deep in the jungle was still around. They weren't, but we had a lot of fun. So I did all three of those things in about 15 days.
Wow. Well, I have to imagine at this point, with as much familiarity you have with the area, you can get around pretty efficiently. And, you know, anybody going into the area for the first time, 15 days wouldn't be enough to explore even a couple hundred yards. But, you know, you spent so many years down there. What about the actual structures there? What new structurally is being examined at the time?
Well, the so-called megaliths of Kapuli, I say so-called because I'm not convinced they're actually megaliths, were fascinating. That I'm publishing a video on that I'll be releasing on YouTube probably next week. But they're large stones that were discovered in this individual's backyard on his property, and it's in this tiny village. It's really like a glorified homestead, really. And you have to hike to it. There's no roads that go there. And this was brought to my attention through Wandering Wolf, Mike at Wandering Wolf Productions.
Nice.
And I recognized the area, and I've had a lot of experience in this area. I knew people there rather. And so it wasn't very difficult for me to make the arrangements to go myself. And I hiked up there and inspected those stones. And then what happened was, and I guess I should give you my thoughts on that. It's in regard to the megaliths of Kapuli, they're very, very large stones. And if they're real megaliths, then they're approximating the size of the stones at Baalbek. Not exactly that large, but you know, large rectangular stones, larger than any stones, assuming that they're cut stones, larger than any stones I've seen in Peru, at any of the megalithic sites. So it would indeed be a very fantastic discovery. However, upon inspection, I did not discover any evidence of tooling on the stones, and I noticed that the stones have they're fissuring in vertical lines. So if you're standing on the rectangle, you'll notice that there's vertical lines where the stone is beginning to fissure, and naturally. And so if a stone is fissuring in that manner, it's going to break off into rectangles. So it was really, there was nothing that was indicative to me of tooling, as I said, or that these stones were being harvested and cut into these rectangle shapes. However, I am leaving the door open for this to be a quarry. It is possible that it's a quarry. There are some very interesting right angles, but again, the nature of the fissuring on these stones, they would break into rectangles because we're looking at vertical lines, very straight lines, a process of natural fissuring. So, but that doesn't mean that they weren't being harvested for some kind of a megalithic complex. Indeed, while I was out there, and this is in an area of Peru that I'm very familiar with. It's in the high jungle, and the high jungle is where the Amazon meets the Andes. It's a very mysterious place. And while I was out there, it came to my attention that there had been a discovery that was made a month previous to my arrival, and it was an anthropologist who discovered this wall, and what he believes is a wall. And at first I wasn't really interested because usually there's discoveries all the time in Peru, and it's usually, you know, unimpressive ruins or something related to the Inca.
Is this it right here? Is this it right here? I'm looking through media on your. I just want to put it up on screen and just make sure. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's not Kapuli. That is what I'm talking about now. So this anthropologist took a picture in front of that, and long story short, I ended up meeting with him, and he's a Peruvian guy, and we discussed a larger project that he had in the area. They were looking for the They were looking for the original foundations of this particular town, city in the jungle, one of the oldest cities in the jungle, in fact, in Peru. And they were stumbling across some very interesting ruins. And he discovered this. And when I say discovered, understand that you'll see there's a straight line going through the wall there. That's a tree trunk that's hollowed out. They use those to transport water in Peru. And they're up further up the river. I'm standing next to really a stream there. Further up that stream, there's a water processing, and it's not a water processing edifice. It's more like a little dam system that they put in the stream to collect water. So somebody is collecting water, probably for irrigation up there. But he was the first one to clear that off and to recognize it as potentially something interesting. And again, that is not Kapuli. That's not what I was talking about before. Mm-hmm. This is something different. And when I saw him standing in front of that wall, I immediately was very curious and wanted to go there myself, which I did, obviously. And I went there, and I found it to be very compelling, because sometimes you see what appears to be a wall from the front like that, such as Sage Wall over here, an hour from where I live here in Montana, the famous Montana Megalith Sage Wall. And when you go to the site and you look at the wall, if you go to the backside of what appears to be a wall on the front, you find that what look like blocks aren't actually blocks, because they don't go all the way through the wall. So they're not blocks. They weren't stacked there. It's obviously the result of fissuring. In this case, the first thing I wanted to do when I got out there was to see if these were actually blocks. And they are. They're blocks. Mm. And the way that this wall is shaped, this is, of course, polygonal. And it's very much like the foundation stones of Machu Picchu. So, and what makes this really unique is it's in the jungle. It's in the jungle. And there really have not been any, certainly in this area of the jungle, there have never been any megalithic structures discovered. Definitely in this area of the jungle. We are not close to Machu Picchu here, or Cusco. We're on the other side of the Andes. We're in the northern Andes here, the high jungle. So, and then also, so the wall is standing there in front of this stream, and in the stream itself, it appears that somebody has carved a canal, like literally carved it into the stone. So you have this canal, and then you have what I believe is a megalithic retainer wall. I also went, and in that same area, I visited a cascade that is, I'm trying to remember the name of it, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'm going to publish a video on my YouTube channel about all of this in the coming week. But this cascade, and it's a sort of a tourist destination, but only for the local people. Gringos don't really go out here. And the locals just think it's a waterfall, and it's very interesting. And there's pictures of that in that thread, I think, of what I'm talking about here. This cascade at the end. If you're looking at Twitter, there should be a picture of the cascade I'm talking about at the third picture.
I'll take a look. Hold on.
It's when I went to this cascade, I was very intrigued, because it appeared to me that although the face of the cascade was not cut stone, I don't think it's cut stone. It's clearly not cut stone, because it's like slate. It's like layers of stone that are smooth, and they're following the contour of the mountains, so they're bedrock. But it appears that somebody had removed layers of slate to direct the river this way, and to create a canal, really what amounts to an aqueduct. So, and you would have had to remove, 5 feet of slate or something like that, and they did it in such a way so that it gradually channels the water down into these pools.
This is it right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that those are cut stones, although they do kind of look like cut stones. They're not. If you dig into the jungle all around, you'll find that bedrock. And you'll see above me, there's like that line in the slate. That's a layer of slate that's been removed to give it that gradual, to give it the decline, and it terminates right there in a pool. And that pool is definitely man-made. And then it continues on, it terminates in another pool before it goes off the cliff. in a waterfall, and that to me is an aqueduct. And if you to my left and to my right there into the jungle, the terrain is about definitely 5 feet higher, if not 6, 7, 8 feet higher on both sides. Somebody opened up this canal to, in my opinion, to direct the water in what amounts to an aqueduct. Okay, so you have a potential megalithic quarry. Potential. I think it's indeterminate right now, at least in my opinion. The Kapoli megaliths. I'm not, ready to call those megaliths, but it's a potential site for quarrying, and what I think is sandstone, by the way. Then you have this strange aqueduct cascade feature, which again I do believe is artificial. And then you have that megalithic retainer wall. And talking to this anthropologist, he has a project in the area, as I said, looking for the original foundations of the city out there in the jungle. And he's discovered a corridor out there where they've found all kinds of interesting things along this corridor, including 2 large stone tombs, which they've not been able to get access to because it's on private property, and the property owners are very aggressive about people trespassing. So he's an anthropologist in the university, and he's working with archaeologists and other professionals on his team, and they believe they've discovered something very important. And I failed to highlight that when I went up to Kapoli, as I said, you can't drive to that village. You have to hike to it. And the way you get there is along this very ancient trail. And as I'm walking up this trail, which is, there's stairwells in it, and it's made of stone. A lot of it is made of stone, but it's degraded. I realize I'm walking on an ancient road, very much like the Inca roads that I've been on in Peru. Very much like that. And very well maintained. Well, at one time it was very well maintained. The villagers just keep it open now, and I suspected that the villagers did not make this road; that they used it to get up to the area where they established their village. And in fact, I learned that was the case. That when I went up to the village, I talked to them, asked them who made the road, and they said the Indians did a long time ago. So there's a road, and when you find a road like this. These kinds of roads, and I don't have pictures for you right now, but these kinds of roads always go somewhere important, always, in the jungle and in the Andes. They don't build roads like that go nowhere. They go somewhere important. So this anthropologist and his team discovered this corridor out there in the high jungle where there's all kinds of important ruins. And so after seeing all this, I suspected, before I talked to the anthropologist, I suspected that there was a lost city out there, a very important lost city. And in fact, we may be talking about a lost megalithic city. And when I talked to the anthropologist, he absolutely agreed with me. He said, we know there's a city. There has to be, because we have this city here and we have that city over there. And these roads connect. There's got to be one here. So this could be, if in fact there is a lost city out there and it's megalithic, you're talking about discovery that would rival Machu Picchu, if not surpass Machu Picchu in Peru.
There's people who, I know that you do a lot of work now with, and I know that David Politis is going to be at NephCon coming up and stuff like that. And in doing a lot of research into even missing 411, I realized how there are so many acres of land that man has not stepped foot on, even in some parts of California, because it's so dense and all that stuff. When you talk about rainforest in South America and all that, I think most people tend to think that everything that could have been discovered that is gigantic in size and scope could have already been found. So it's easy to bury.
Just go to the Amazon jungle. Go to the Andes Mountains. I mean, Peru and Brazil, that South America. Remember the central. If you look at this Brazil and Peru, you could draw a humongous circle that takes up half, if not more than half, of South America, and that's untracked jungle. Okay, nobody really goes in there. So there's a tremendous amount of let's just say there's a tremendous amount of discoveries to be made still in Peru and Brazil and Bolivia, those three countries, and Ecuador to some extent, but mainly Peru, Brazil, and Bolivia, because that's where the Amazon meets the Andes. And I have no doubt that there are massive lost cities still in the jungle and in the Andes. In fact, we found a lost city in 2019. I went up with my colleague Anselm P. Rambla, the Spanish explorer, and he and I discovered this lost city called Tauripunku. And I made a film about it, and that's in my members community. If anybody wants to see that, you can watch that film there. So I know that there's definitely the cities of the Inca that have never been discovered. But what makes this particular area of Peru so interesting to me, this corridor that was discovered by the anthropologist and his team, is that this is associated with they're associating this corridor with the Chachapoyas people. And in Peru, the Chachapoyas people, very ancient indigenous population, the Chachapoyas culture rather, they're very enigmatic. There's two cultures that I think are highly enigmatic in Peru. There's a lot of cultures that I could rattle off 5 that are some of the most mysterious cultures on earth, all in Peru. But the two that I would put at the top of my list are the Paracas culture. Those are the guys with the elongated skulls. And then the Chachapoyas culture. And the Chachapoyas culture, because even today, if you go to Chachapoyas, even today, you can find natives in Chachapoyas who have red hair and blue eyes, or green hair or blonde hair, or rather green eyes and blonde hair, not green hair. That's something else. You find that in the United States.
That's here.
No, in Chachapoyas, it's indigenous. It's not that they were marrying gringos anytime soon, and it's not because they married the Spaniards. If you talk to the Chachapoyas people, you'll find out that they believe that they are the ancestors of a race of red-haired giants that inhabited that part of Peru. In fact, I've heard, and I have very good reason to believe, and I have good sources on this, that the bodies of giants have been discovered in Chachapoyas, were discovered years ago, decades ago, 9 feet tall, 9 feet long, and were secreted away to repositories in Lima, in the capital city. But the native people believe that they're descended from a race of giants. That's the legends in the area. And this corridor in the jungle where I think there's a lost megalithic city is attributed so far by the anthropologist and his team to the Chachapoyas people. And remember, there's 2 huge tombs made of stone. So you can imagine, I am very anxious to get back out there. In fact, the anthropologist invited me to join his team. He wants us to team up. I have as I've talked about on your show before, I have my partner and I, Gary Haven, we have a state-of-the-art ground penetrating radar that operates off of a drone platform. So I would like to, in fact, I've got a project that I'm beginning to put this project together with the anthropologist and his team. I'm going to bring my team, and I want to go back in with LiDAR, ground penetrating radar, and look for A, this lost city, and B, try to open these tombs, because there may be something very, very interesting inside of them. And this isn't me ransacking the artifacts in Peru. This is me being invited to join this project, to partner with this project by the team that is the professional team that is doing this in an official capacity. Again, anthropologists, archaeologists, and other kinds of professionals from the universities. Yeah. So anyway, that's part of what I was doing in Peru. And Mike Cernovich was along for the ride for a lot of this. So it was a lot of fun.
I just put that together because I realized that the pictures that I was just putting up on screen were not from it was retweeted from your account, but it was posted on Mike Cernovich's account. So that's quite a name drop right there. So he because I know that he found Birthright not too long ago. I saw him tweet about it, and it had filtered its way into my timeline. I saw, good for Timothy, and as many people read your book, the better. But that's really interesting there. And you said a couple of things that are going to tie into future questions I have for you tonight, especially when it comes to lineage of giants. But since you've already just said it right now with ground penetrating radar, not to get too much into the Khafre pyramid, the satellite scans that got everybody talking about that obviously there's no consensus on this, but satellite imaging that suggested there might be miles long infrastructure under the pyramid in Egypt. And it got me thinking, why not any technological use to cut corners out there in mapping what could possibly be hidden in the jungle, especially since you don't need to go and penetrate the earth 2 kilometers. You just want to see what ruins are there on the surface.
Yeah, the most useful tool for this kind of work is LiDAR. It isn't GPR. Once you discover an edifice, then you bring the GPR in to see what's under it, see how deep it goes, to find its foundations, what have you, or to look for artifacts. But to discover the edifice, you use LiDAR. Now, if you're looking at a desert, you don't need LiDAR, because what LiDAR does is it removes the vegetation. And so if you're in the jungle, if you're in a heavily forested area, that's what you want to use. You can make all kinds of discoveries, and archaeologists do all the time, just using satellite imagery, because you can see the outline of buildings and things of that nature. So you could use LiDAR to great effect. Now, if in this project, and the one I was mentioning in Peru now, in regard to this discovery in Egypt, whenever I see a story blow up like that and go viral all over social media and be picked up by so many different accounts, and people are making YouTube videos about it, posting it on Instagram and X and TikTok, just going crazy with it, I always back off. I always step away from the story, because I feel like there's something wrong. It's like, that's a major red flag to me. When there's so much hyperbole injected and so much speculation, I find it to be unuseful, and also most of those stories end up getting walked back, because there's just so much hyperbole right out front. And I think that's the case with this story, with the alleged pillars beneath the pyramid, the pyramids of Giza. And I suspect, having used my technology, the GPR stuff in Peru and other places, one thing that we had to deal with all the time was reflections. So you would get reflections and echoes. So you would get a reading on something, and then that reading would echo, and you would have to be able to distinguish the echo from how many objects are actually under there. And it's not easy. You have to do various scans. You have to really analyze the data to separate the echo from the actual structure. And you can get reflections too if there's water. And we know that there is water under the Giza plateau.
Right.
So you have water, and then I saw the readout of the technology, satellite based, and I believe it's sonar. I saw the reading, the raw data, not these ridiculous 3D models that everybody's passing around the internet. The raw data, and it did not. I don't understand how they converted that raw data into those 3D models.
I know, it's very crisp.
It just seemed like it was a stretch. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's what it's going to turn out to be. But I would not have publicized it that way. And we can get with GPR. You probably can't do this with the satellite stuff, but with GPR, if you have the right kind of technology, you can get 3D imaging. But even when you get to 3D imaging, and it's really impressive, you have to be careful. You have to know what you're looking at. That's why when we do it, we work with experts who know what they're looking at, so that they can distinguish the echoes and the reflections from the actual structures. And then I know, I didn't watch it, but I watched some videos of people who did, some guys I respect online. It was an Italian team who made the discovery, and they did a press conference, and I guess their press conference was just awful. It was just very, very unorganized, very unprofessional, and it really did not help their case at all. In fact, it hurt their case, because it seemed like they were getting ahead of their skis, so to speak. They had come out with this big announcement and these 3D models, and everybody took it and ran with it. So I think, without question, there's something under the pyramids. There's always when you see a megalithic structure, there's always going to be something underneath. Always, every time, there's something underneath. Whether that be more chambers, we know there's more chambers under the Great Pyramid. But could it be like a secret hall of records, like under the Sphinx? It would not surprise me in the least. I would expect to find something like that under the pyramid. It could be, it could be perhaps that's where the tombs are, or maybe that's got something to do with the theory that the pyramids were built to generate energy. Maybe there's some evidence of that under there. So I don't have any doubt that there are some kind of structure under the pyramids. There's something probably remarkable hidden under those pyramids, no doubt whatsoever. But I purposely backed off that story because I knew that they were going to have to walk it back at some point. Now, I think that what really needs to be done to confirm that find is to fly GPR around the pyramid. I mean, we could fly our GPR unit. Now, I know that I forget how far down that goes. It's like some ridiculous depth, those alleged columns that they found under the pyramid.
2 kilometers. What they said is 2 kilometers.
Yeah, just super, super far down. But our technology goes about 300 feet. But it's enough to detect.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's enough to detect if the top of those structures, or at least enough of it to confirm or deny. And we've already used it in Peru. And now I'm not saying that we're going to do that because there's no way in hell that the authorities over there in Egypt are going to let us do that. I mean, they're famously uncooperative in Egypt, more so than Peru even. And Peru's pretty rough. Peru's pretty rough territory, but Egypt's worse. And so I'm not saying we're going to get the chance to do that. And I don't get your hopes up for anybody to go digging. They're not going to let anybody dig. So that's really all I have to say about that. I mean, those 3D images that everybody is passing around on social media are almost certainly not accurate. Now there may be one thing like that, or 2 or 3, and then it's echoes or reflections. If that's exactly what's under there, I will be shocked. I would be delighted and shocked. But don't hold your breath for that. Number one, you're never going to find out. Number two, it's probably not like those 3D models. Maybe about 3 weeks or so before the story started getting around, I was watching, and I don't watch Mr. Beast, but I was sitting down on the couch with my wife and my daughter on a Saturday night, just a little bit before she was going to go to bed. So I said, let's just watch some YouTube videos, domino films, whatever. Oh, something on the pyramids. And it is with the first Mr. Beast film, the video I ever watched, and he's being led into the pyramids by, of course, Zahi Hawass, who I've heard mixed things about since the gatekeeper.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, since the 90s, and the entire thing, I'm watching this kind of chuckling to myself. We kept watching it because it's a gigantic structure, and Aurora is just taken back by how tall it is and all that stuff. But I'm listening to them peddle the state line about how these are tombs for the pharaohs and all that other stuff. And I'm like, come on. But then also inside of it, they were led down into some deeper part where they actually hit water. And they were
they went swimming.
Yeah, they're sloshing around in the water there. So when Jimmy Corsetti brought that, actually referenced that video, I said, oh yeah, that's right. How does the water that we know is under there affect this satellite readout? How accurate can it really be if there's at least one sizable and significant layer of water between all of that stuff? Does that become almost like an insulating factor to this and inhibits the imaging in some way? So I just figured I'd ask how that would actually translate into something more surface level in the jungles of South America. So and before we move on to a question about megaliths, I'd like to ask you just about the so-called alien mummies, these 3-toed mummies over here. I got a couple of pictures. What's the basis of these? Is it more Mexican paper mache or what?
Not this one. So first understand that there's a lot of misinformation about these things on the internet, and some of it's disinformation purposely put out there, not by the government, but by the guy who actually discovered these mummies, because he doesn't want people to know where he found them and the circumstances that he found them in. I have been in communication with him, and that's another story. But so allegedly, no, let me walk that back. I'm not going to use the word allegedly here. I think it's now known and has been confirmed that about 150 mummies were discovered in the Nazca Desert, in the area of Nazca, or somewhere, Palpa, Nazca, Ica, that area, generally speaking, some years ago. When I say some years ago, probably 7, 8 years ago, maybe even more. I don't remember when the original discovery was made. So these are not new. They've been around for a long time. Gaia TV has done a bunch of, documentaries and stuff on them. Other people have done documentaries. But much like that story about those structures under the pyramid, I sort of backed away from this, and I did not want to get involved or comment on it, and I wouldn't for years. And I've known about that. I've known about these mummies at least going back to 2018, 2017, somewhere in there. And I was even I was in the desert where they were extracted, where they were discovered on another project years ago, back in 2018, 2019, and I just didn't want to have anything to do with it, with these mummies, because there's too many hoaxes so especially in Mexico and Peru. Those are like the two biggest places where hoaxing is an industry. It's an industry, making these kinds of, fake mummies and stuff. So I didn't want to comment on it until I could actually go and see these things for myself. And I had the opportunity to do that a few weeks ago. And I was invited by Professor Zuniga, Dr. Zuniga from the Museum of Ica, to come and take a look at these mummies. Now, the University of Ica has 5 mummies, and I only gave you pictures of the larger one. They call that Maria. Some people are calling it Mario now. At first, they thought that it was a female. Now they think maybe it's a male, and some people are saying it's a hermaphrodite. But aside from Maria, you have 4 other mummies, and some of them or 3 other mummies rather. And those are the small ones. And I don't know if do you remember the small ones that were all over the news that Jaime Maussan in Mexico unveiled?
The 12 inchers?
Like at a press conference. Yeah. He had them in they looked like he was in shoe boxes. They were these little mummies. And they had those too. So I saw those as well. But I wasn't really that interested in the little ones, because I'll give you my first impressions, okay? And I'm making a video about this as well that I'm going to put on YouTube. And I haven't really processed all of my thoughts about this yet. I'm still researching. I'm still thinking about what I saw. And I talked to the professors at the university. I interviewed Dr. Zuniga, and I'm just processing all of that. But my initial reaction was when I walked up to Maria, to the large mummy, my first thought was, oh my God, that's real. That was my thought. I think this is real. And I don't have any scientific reason to say that. That was just my impression. And I'm pretty incredulous, as I said, especially as it pertains to artifacts from Mexico and Peru. But this one, viscerally struck me as real. This was alive. This thing was living and breathing and walking around. Okay. But when I walked up to the next to Maria there, you can't see it, but behind me, there's the smaller ones. They're I think they're 2 feet tall. They don't look like that, and you can't. There's one behind me there. You can't see it. And I thought immediately, these don't strike me as real. They weren't living and breathing. Their bone structure's wrong. The joints look weird. I just can't imagine this thing walking around. But that doesn't mean that those small ones aren't real artifacts. I think they are. I think they're effigies. I think they're dolls, effigies that are supposed to represent the big ones. They have 3 toes and 3 fingers as well. These are called the tridactyl beings, because they have 3 toes and 3 fingers. They're tridactyls. And there's a few things about these mummies that are very interesting. Aside from the fact that they have 3 fingers and 3 toes, they have elongated skulls. They have overly large eye sockets, really, really big eyes. They have really small noses. They don't have ears. They have little holes for ears. And lest anyone think that these are gray aliens, they have large, protruding, puckered ape lips. And if you go back to the other view where you're looking down at it, you'll see what I mean. So they're really, really, well, you can't really see there. but I have a bunch of pictures. I should have sent you some more, but you can see the large eyes at least. The thing that makes this credible is there have been a number of teams, and this is what the professors at the University of Ica told me. There's been a number of teams who've come to test these mummies, and specifically the large ones. And I should say that the University of Ica only has one large one, but there are many more. There's I've been told there's 7 to a dozen of the large ones. And the other ones are in other collections. And, that's all very misty in Peru because there's some legal stuff attached to it. But this is the one that the University of Ica has in their possession. And on this one and on others that are like it, mummies of, let's call it the same species, there have been several highly scientific teams, several professional scientific teams that have come from various countries to analyze these mummies. And there have been a team from the United States, for example, and they've taken MRI, X-ray, and DNA samples, and they've even dissected some of the fingers. Some of the mummies, both small and large, have implants that are made of gold and different kinds of metals. And there's a very interesting alloy called osmium that's been discovered in these implants. And osmium, it's not really, they don't ever discover it in ancient artifacts. It's a metal that's only been known for, I think, about a decade. And osmium is only used today in communications technologies. That's the only use we have for osmium, or at least its primary use today. And the implants were found to have tissue and bone growing over them. In other words, they were added while whatever the thing was alive. So there's just mountains of data, and Dr. Zuniga went over all this data with me, and it's difficult to argue with the data. Now, I'm just to give you my conclusion here really quick before we run out of time. I'm leaning in the direction now of these things, not the small ones. I'm only talking about the larger ones, Maria and her like. I'm leaning in the direction that those are real. That again, those were living, breathing creatures. They were sucking air on planet Earth at some point, walking around, specifically among the Paracas and Nazca people. And I'm leaning in that direction. Of course, I'm not closing the door to a hoax because it's Peru, so I can't do that. But I'm leaning in the direction of these things being real, as many people are. Again, these have been around for almost a decade now. But I was really impressed with the overwhelming amount of scientific data that these guys have collected, and the MRI scans. There's a professor, I think his name is John McDowell, very well known. He's a forensic something or other, I can't recall, but he's very well known, highly prestigious guy. He went as part of Massan's team, him and an American delegation, and they did MRI scans, and they took a good look at these things. And he's got the same opinion as me. He's leaning in the direction of them being real based on the MRIs and X-rays and DNA analysis. They cannot find any. They can't find any epoxies. Like there's no glue holding the joints together. There's nothing that's not natural sinew and tissue and bone. So they're 100% organic, other than the implants, and they have determined that all of the structural integrity of the skeletal, let's say this, the integrity of the skeletal structure of those three-fingered mummies, the large ones, are sound. In other words, that being could have walked around. The hands and the feet would have been functional based on the MRI scans and the X-rays. They have found no evidence. They're not willing to come out and say these are non-human, but they are willing to say they have found no evidence whatsoever that they're hoaxes. The large ones. McDowell and his team were not given access to the small ones, interestingly enough. Only the large ones. So, and also, by the way, the DNA analysis on these things, according to Dr. Zuniga, 30% of the DNA is human, just 30%. The other 70% is what he calls anomalous. And he made the point to me. He said, human beings have more in common with a papaya than with this thing, because a papaya, we share 40% of our DNA with a papaya. So whatever these things are, if they're real, obviously we got to go back to the history books because we got to do some revision because these things were walking around, living, breathing among the Paracas people, among the Nazca people. And my question is, if that's the case, if these were living creatures, were they interbreeding with the natives? Is that why we get these elongated skulls of the Paracas people? Certainly many of those skulls are the result of cranial deformation, of head boarding and head binding. But some of them, in my opinion, I've done extensive research on the Paracas skulls. I've done DNA analysis in Paracas. I was just looking at them again a couple weeks ago in Peru. And my opinion, my hypothesis is that some of those Paracas people, their skulls are the result of a natural genetic deviation. In other words, it's like a subspecies of Homo sapien. Could they be the result of interbreeding between whatever this is and the indigenous people? Certainly, this has a very natural-looking elongated skull. And the Paracas people, by the way, those Paracas elongated skulls, their orbital sockets are overly large, 25 to 40% larger than ours, just like that mummy. So, and it's really not a mummy, by the way. It's technically a desiccated body, but it's a lot easier to say mummy. So I just say mummy.
Well, you know, when you talk
anyway,
about
those are my initial thoughts on that.
I mean, they're big ones, especially when you come down back down to say, you know, we have to reconsider the history books on this, and of course that's the basis of all the things we're talking about tonight is how far back do we go, and we haven't even gotten to the biblical aspect to all of this just yet. And so to get away from the bodies just for a second, to go back to the megaliths, because I want to tie both hemispheres together here. Obviously, when you talk about megalithic structures, the pyramids in Egypt always steal the show. But you know, questions that evoke most curiosity about the pyramids, curiosity, controversy, is their construction. You know, was it really slave labor, ropes and pulleys? How are these massive stones being transported from quarries many miles away? And that is beside all of the celestial exactitudes that are baked into the positions of these structures, as you and I have done in the past for all different types of occasions and holidays. But my question for you is, are all of these same questions and mysteries just as relevant for the megalithic structures of Central and South America, or is more known about their creation and construction than in the Eastern Hemisphere?
I would say in some ways the Pyramid of Giza was easier to construct than some of the things I've seen elsewhere.
Oh.
Because it uses smaller blocks, although many, many, many blocks, you know, tens and dozens of tons. But like Baalbek, for example, Baalbek is really I think Baalbek is much more difficult to explain than the pyramids of Giza. But yeah, all of the megaliths share. There are trademarks, fingerprints of the builders that you see all over the earth. In other words, if they weren't the same builders, they were builders using the same technology. And this technology is referred to as Cyclopean masonry. And Cyclopean masonry, that's the technical term, by the way, is the construction of complexes, of edifices with large stones without the use of mortar. They're so precisely fit together that there's no need for mortar. And the most impressive representations of Cyclopean architecture are two kinds, are the polygonal, because there's so many different angles cut into a stone, and that stone has to be fitted precisely with all the other stones around. It's like building a megalithic jigsaw puzzle. And then the interlocking. And the interlocking is like Legos. It's like megalithic stones that have, you know, you have one stone that's got a impression cut out of it, and then the other stone has like a knob on it, and they lock together. And that's very, very impressive technology that was lost. It was obviously lost because it's anti-seismic. And so why would you, if the ancients were, let's say the ancient Egyptians or the ancient Peruvians, the Inca, were building Cyclopean edifices, why didn't that knowledge of of how to build these beautiful massive buildings that can withstand earthquakes and cataclysm. Why didn't that progress into the future? Why was the knowledge lost? It seems very useful. I mean, useful knowledge is not willfully forgotten. Useful knowledge disappears because the people who are proliferating that knowledge are eradicated. The knowledge goes with them to the grave. So that's really the question is, where is the explanation? Where is the explanation by any ancient culture of how megaliths were built? Where is the diagram? Where is the cuneiform? Where is the hieroglyphics? Where's the information about how these things were built? There's no information. There's nothing. It's like the ancient cultures had no idea how they were built, and they were just as awestruck as we are today by them. So these are the fingerprints of the builders who disappeared from the face of the earth. I probably went far afield of your question. I don't remember what it was.
No. Actually, you led me right to the next thing, because you have brought us to the front door of the eradication question. And, I saw, at least up until that point where you were talking about how you believe that from a disaster cycle standpoint on the planet Earth, you were talking to Michael Knowles about this. So you probably said it with me at some point too, that you had some level of belief that those who were constructing these megalithic sites were actually building them to withstand these disaster cycles that they knew were coming and would come again and again and again in some kind of a cyclical fashion. And I was wondering about that in particular, because invariably when you discuss ancient sites, you need to talk about why they're in disrepair and what happened to that that culture that called that place home, and or like who was the original culture. You came on in January, I believe, of 2023 to talk about the Younger Dryas, specifically the comet impact theory. And I've had a few conversations with guests and with personal friends of mine who are dutifully preparing for a geophysical shift of the Earth's poles, and they believe that this phenomenon is what is responsible for most of the great resets that we have had on the planet. What do you say about that theory? That impacts are one thing. It's almost like shooting fish in a barrel, or it's all about probability there. But as far as more so being on a timeline where you can expect there to be some kind of catastrophic shakeup on the planet coming, a lot of people point toward actual geophysical shifts of the planet, especially because it happens so fast. It is almost like atomic bombs are going off all over the place. You ever give that any thought?
Yeah, I have no doubt that the Earth has suffered cyclic cataclysm for many thousands of years. Cataclysm that arrives precisely at the same time in a cycle. And that cosmic cycle is calculated with the zodiac, by the way, the precession of the equinox. And what the cause of the cataclysm is, I mean, we can only speculate. It seems to me the easiest explanation is some kind of cosmic debris. We collide with cosmic debris. Something it comes into our solar system, into the neighborhood of the planets in our solar system, and at precise intervals of many thousands of years, we collide with that debris. And that would explain why the cataclysm is described as having varying effects, sometimes affecting, and this was told to Solon of Athens by the priests of Sais in Egypt in Plato's dialogue, the Critias and Timaeus, that sometimes the cataclysm affects people differently. If you live in the mountains, you're utterly destroyed, but the people living by the sea and rivers are spared, and sometimes the people living by the sea and rivers are completely eradicated, and the people living in the mountains survive. The cataclysm it doesn't always have the same impact. That seems clear to me when we talk about cyclic cataclysm. Now, again, to complete that thought, it would seem to me that if you're running into, if the Earth is colliding with a debris field, that would make a lot of sense because it depends on the size and weight and volume of debris that's bombarding the Earth. If you hit hardly anything, you're not going to get much cataclysm. The effects will be localized. If you hit a lot of stuff, and if you hit big stuff, then it's going to be global. So that's why I favor the impact hypothesis for the cyclic cataclysm. I believe there's maybe something akin to a large asteroid that moves into our solar system every 6,480 years, and it's carrying behind it an enormous debris field. And that when it slingshots around our sun, the Earth collides with that debris field. And it happens like clockwork, just like the orbit of the Earth around the sun. That to me seems it's a very elegant theory, I think. But in terms of pole shifts and solar activity, yeah, I mean, all of that can play a part, or it could all be happening at the same time. Maybe that large body coming into our solar system causes the pole shift, causes some of the solar activity, the anomalous solar activity. So I think it's funny because before I jumped on this call with you, I was watching I'm sure some of you have seen the debunking of Graham Hancock, Dan Richards, and Jimmy Corsetti by Professor Dave. Professor Dave Explains on his YouTube channel, and these guys they just laugh at the idea that the Earth has been subjected to civilization-ending cataclysm. They scoff at it, and yet the collective testimony of our ancient antecedents is just that the Earth has been subjected to civilization-ending cataclysm. It's everywhere. Every major culture, civilization on Earth tells this story. And why should we disbelieve them? Because we're moderns and we have archaeologists and we have modern technology. I think it's very arrogant, and I think that as time progresses, we're going to see evidence coming out, and it's already happening as it pertains to the Younger Dryas impact, evidence that is supporting the idea that at least once, but certainly more than once, but at least once, and we're not talking about the dinosaurs, we're talking about the flood of Noah, the aqueous cataclysm. At least once the Earth, the civilizations of Earth have been brought to utter ruin in some kind of devastating cataclysmic event, which, of course, as you mentioned, I think likely happened sometime around 10,500 BC. Indeed, the Younger Dryas period, and I think that the impact hypothesis is plausible as the catalyst for that cataclysm.
Well, and here's where we have a lot of different things collide. And I'm glad that you brought up modern day archaeology and mainstream science and all that stuff and how they scoff and laugh and thumb their nose at anybody that comes in and tries to, offer up a different hypothesis or question anything that has become long-standing consensus and whatever the hell else. And that is not only the idea of, what could be the cause of either planetary catastrophe, or when we go deeper into, like biblical eschatology, and we start talking about the actual end times, judgment day, all that stuff. This is where I find your work especially interesting over the years that we've known each other now. And that is where mainstream science and archaeology, it's very secular and wants nothing to do with the Bible. But I wanted to know, because I don't think I've asked you this, but at which point in all of your adventures, your learning, your studying and whatnot, did you become convinced that the biblical texts were actually indispensable when trying to understand the story that either these ancient megalithic sites are trying to tell us, or anything else, from either a chronological timeline to some sort of a, you're saying again with the Peruvian tribes that were asserting that they are descendants of red-haired giants, or of course, just when we were looking at Maria, the alien mummy right there, whether or not there could have been some interbreeding going on. A lot of that has very biblical Genesis 6 undertones and overtones. So before we get into all that, what was the point where you realized that the Bible was not separate from all of this, for you at least, and it was actually indispensable in understanding what was going on?
Well, the biblical flood myth is certainly in the tradition of all the other flood myths around the world, but I think that the biblical story is drawing on the original story, and the original story would have been preserved by Noah and his offspring. And I personally think that the earliest account of the flood is actually the Book of Enoch, and that many of these other accounts are based off of that original story. Because if in fact Enoch wrote the Book of Enoch, then, or wrote something like the Book of Enoch, a manuscript that's been lost to the world, then that would mean that it is the oldest, or one of the oldest manuscripts ever penned by a human hand, because Enoch was the seventh from Adam. And in fact, in the Book of Enoch, he's called the scribe of righteousness. He's referred to as a scribe, and the Jews consider him to this day to be a great scribe and prophet. So he wrote and he prophesied. And so I think that the biblical narrative of the flood is correct. However, I believe it's misinterpreted. And I'm not a young earth creationist in that I don't believe that the flood happened just some thousands of years ago, like 3,300 BC. I used to think that. I did. I used to think that, but I ran into a problem with that time frame, because I was encountering megaliths in various parts of the world that were very clearly aligned, precisely aligned to celestial phenomena, and could be dated using archaeoastronomy. And the dating of the megaliths seems to be consistent, at least many of them across the board. They seem to have been dated right at the beginning of the age of Leo, sometime around 10,500 BC, somewhere in the neighborhood of 12,500 years ago. And it became indisputable, reviewing this evidence, seeing it with my own eyes, discussing, for example, the foundation date of the city of Cusco with my colleague and friend Andre Sadazme, who's an archaeoastronomer and an architect. And I believe he's, for example, found indisputable evidence that the city of Cusco was founded circa 10,000 BC, somewhere in the window of 10,000 BC. Again, just synchronizing with so much of the other archaeoastronomical discoveries around the world as it pertains to the megaliths. So the biblical narrative in regard to the flood of Noah, I think, is stemming from the most ancient, which would be the Enochian tale, which would be the Book of Enoch, from which all other flood myths derive. And if that is the biblical narrative, I mean, if you believe in the biblical narrative, then it was Noah and his sons who replenished the earth and proliferated whatever knowledge that they had managed to preserve through the flood. And it's from Noah and his sons that you're going to get every ancient culture, including the Sumerians, including the ancient Egyptians, including the Pelasgians, the ancient Greeks, and so forth. Those would have been the offspring of Noah. So what story of the flood would Noah have been holding in his hands? Well, he lived through it, so there's word of mouth, but he would also have had the written account of the Genesis 6 affair before the book of Genesis was written, which would have been in the form of the Book of Enoch, some manuscript attributed to his great-great-grandfather Enoch. And so this is the narrative that I subscribe to, not just because I happen to be a Christian, but because it seems because the evidence seems to best synchronize with it. That's why you have this similarity in all of these different variegated flood myths around the world, because they have a common source. And everybody thinks the common source is the Sumerian, the Babylonian flood myth, rather, which derives from the ancient Mesopotamian legends. And that certainly those texts predate the Bible. They predate the writing, the compiling of the 66 books of the Bible, but they do not predate the story, the Enochian tale that was passed down from Enoch to his offspring, And in fact, Enoch is charged. He was charged to write and to preserve and to pass down the knowledge that he was given, not only about the what had happened in the antediluvian world, but what was going to happen, the oracles of Enoch, the prophecies of Enoch, many of which pertain, by the way, to the coming Son of Man, who was manifest in the person of Jesus of Nazareth.
So take that and let's start expanding it across the sea now, because I like that you brought up how we went from Samaria to Egypt, and when you talk about that, that's when we really get into this this geographical picture that I have in my head whenever I think about anything that is chronicled in the Bible, whatever the hell it is. And I'm sure a lot of people have this, where the Bible takes us from Egypt to Persia to Turkey, like Corinth. You go, back to Palestine, around the Mediterranean. Paul's letters going to Rome. Whatever. It's everything is like happening within a 3,000 square mile swath of land. But of course, it leaves a lot of the world out. So what I wonder is, aside from, of course, how the flood story is shared throughout so many cultures. Can you come up with some more examples of how biblical texts could be applicable to understanding, for example, an ancient site in Central America, which seems to have its own giants legends. It seems to, of course, be aligning many of its more sacred monuments to what's going on in the sky. They're definitely noticing all the same things. There's plenty to be said about ancient stories and myths and legends about the Egyptians having made it their way into Central and South America or in the southern part of the United States, and there's a lot of that going on out there. But I just wonder how the Bible could actually help you make some sense of things in a hemisphere where you're already 10,000 miles removed from where any of the events of the Bible took place.
Well, I wouldn't say that the Bible directly informs me of every archaeological artifact,
but I know that
site that
I know that it's important to you in your analysis, and also
I would say that not everything that's happened in the world, not. I mean, we were just talking about those three-fingered mummies. Not everything. Even important things is recorded in the Bible, obviously. The Bible isn't a compendium of human history. It's not a compendium of everything that was happening in every corner of the earth. It's a message. The Bible is as the late Chuck Missler used to say, it's a integrated message system from outside of time, from God. And I would add that it was given to people living in the Bronze and Iron Age in terms that they could understand it, but also encoded in such a way with information, an allegory and metaphor, so that it can be preserved through the ages. So it was written for a specific time to a specific people, but then also communicates through the ages to all mankind, all men that would ever live on planet Earth. So theologically speaking, my theological perspective is firmly rooted in the Bible, specifically in the person of Jesus of Nazareth and in his disciples and the apostles and what they taught. But in regard to archaeological finds and things of that nature, I'm not. I don't come upon like that megalithic wall, for example, if in fact it's a megalithic wall in Peru, and say, okay, how does this fit into the Bible?
Right.
How does this fit into a biblical narrative? I have no use for that. It doesn't matter to me, because the Bible doesn't have to inform me about everything that was happening in all places. However, having said that, if I open up a tomb in Peru and find 9-foot tall red-haired giants, it's not going to surprise me, because I've been informed of this through the biblical narrative and through the ubiquitous testimony of our ancient antecedents all around the world that giants existed. But certainly it's a confirmation also of the biblical narrative, the discovery of giants. So, but not only of the biblical narrative. So Theologically speaking, I'm very much impacted and grounded in the text of Scripture. But again, to just reiterate this for the 10th time, I don't expect the Bible to inform me about everything and anything. It's very specific in the message it conveys.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I take that noted. A couple of weeks ago, I had some friends on, and we were talking about my friends Lobster and Dave. They were on with me, and we were talking about Mount Olympus, and we were talking about the gods of Mount Olympus, and how there really is there's a lot of truth that could be found in this idea that perhaps they really were. This was a planet, and perhaps this stretches across the oceans here too. A planet where lesser gods and deities were being worshipped by people prior to the coming of Christ and the spread of the good word there. So I have to imagine. Have you ever ran with that? That's a little bit of that. That's like a Michael Heiser kind of a route to things. Has that ever crossed over? Because I'm very interested in Central and South America, how they come into us, because it's a very rich spiritual tradition down there. And I just I figure you have some kind of insight on that.
You mean that the gods, like the Greek gods, were real? Is that what you're implying?
Yeah.
I think that the gods in general, when you talk about the gods of the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Mesopotamians, I think that those gods are both mythical and based. It's like let's put it in these terms, okay? It's like a movie that's loosely based on real events. The real characters were the Watchers who descended to the earth in the days of Jared and progenerated the race of giants that inhabited the earth in the antediluvian world. And indeed, their progeny still existed in the world after the flood. So in that sense, the gods were real because they were the Watchers. But were the Olympic gods, real in the sense that the Greek myths portray them? Were they actually like that? No, I don't think so at all. I think that they were used. The myths were used to convey information by the mystery schools. Certainly, that's true in Egypt and Mesopotamia and Greece and Rome. But it's characters it's characters of a fictional narrative that are based loosely on non-fictional characters. Again, the Watchers who descended and who were extraterrestrial gods walking among men. I mean, that's really what they were. And obviously the Watchers were insurgent. They had defected from the kingdom of heaven, so they were beings loyal to the king of heaven before they defected and became insurgent on earth. So they would be, in Heiser's terminology, and not just Heiser, other scholars would refer to these as lesser gods. They're not Yahweh. They're not equivalent to Yahweh, for example, in the Old Testament. These are lesser gods who defected from the kingdom and became the enemies of God. So yeah, I think that's a true story. I do. I believe that the Enochian tale, the story of the descent of the Watchers, is true, and that provides the foundation for many of the myths that would come after. But did Zeus exist? No. Did Aphrodite exist? No. I mean, I don't believe that these gods actually existed. I think that there you could make a connection. You could make a connection, and I'm not sure I would, but you could, between the gods, the nations when they were disinherited at Babel, and this comes from Michael Heiser's work. The nations were disinherited by God at the Tower of Babel, and lesser gods, the sons of God, were given dominion over the nations. And you could say, well, each one of those sons of God is directly equivalent to one of these deities in the Greek pantheon.
Yeah.
That would be a stretch for me. I don't think it's like a one-to-one thing. I don't think that's how it actually works in reality. I don't think that that's an appropriate way to think about the governance, the rule of non-human entities on Earth, in as much as they're given governance, because mankind was given authority of the earth. Mankind, Adam and his offspring forever, were given dominion of planet Earth. So really, what the gods actually, the authority that they have is influence. They can influence the affairs of nations. They can't directly govern them, and that's apparent. I mean, it's never happened. There's never been anything other than a human being sitting on a throne, ever, with the exception of a hybrid. But that's, that harkens back to the Genesis 6 affair. So that was a very circuitous answer to a direct question. I apologize for that.
Taylor, this is what we have. This is why we have so much time. I have two more questions for you if you have time for those.
Sure.
They kind of hit on things that are right in your wheelhouse. Because speaking of watchers and being watched, I'm sure you saw the CIA shenanigans of over the course of the last, I don't know, month or so that have been coming out in dribs and drabs. I thought they were very interesting. First, we got some remote viewing news about how the CIA was locating the Ark of the Covenant through remote viewing. Then we also got a little bit of some information on how UFO abductions were routinely being simulated by the CIA on unsuspecting Americans and other, people that live here on Earth. What do you think about that? Of course, there was also this CIA file about aliens attacking soldiers and leaving them, turning them into pillars of stone. You want to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah? So there's a lot of strangely biblical, weird, disclosure-based CIA things that have been circling around lately. But your thoughts on remote viewing, the Ark of the Covenant, and any kind of CIA releases through the mainstream media about disclosure lately? You can.
Well, I'll address the first one, remote viewing. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, if the CIA had information that we had remote viewed the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, I think remote viewing is real. I've talked about this many times. I think it's a latent ability that is inherent in the human species. I don't advise that people try and do it for reasons I've explained elsewhere, but it wouldn't surprise me. Remote viewing doesn't surprise me. Again, coming from a biblical perspective, I would expect the offspring of Adam and Eve. I would have expected Adam and Eve to have those kinds of psionic capabilities, and I would expect that the offspring of Adam and Eve, i.e., us, that some of us would have those latent capabilities. So, in regard to this, the second thing, I think you said that the CIA had admitted that there's indication that the CIA was faking alien abductions. Is that what you said?
Yeah, the Pulse published this back in late March on Jacques Vallée's, how he secured a document confirming that CIA simulated UFO abductions in Latin America. It's another reason why I wanted to bring this up. Psychological warfare.
Wouldn't surprise me. That wouldn't surprise me either. Now, there is this idea floating around out there. I think it's even perpetuated by such men as Stephen Greer, that the abduction phenomenon has always been perpetrated by human beings. In other words, just like that is being suggested that the CIA or some other organization was abducting people and pretending they were aliens. Does that happen? Has that happened? Wouldn't surprise me. Is that the explanation for the abduction phenomenon? Absolutely not. It is completely absurd. I know you're not, but it's completely absurd to suggest or to think that any human agency could be perpetrating the abduction phenomenon that is so widespread, spanning every continent, involving millions of people, and all of the technological aspects of that phenomenon, and including the impregnation of hybrid fetuses and so forth. It's absolutely absurd to suggest that all abductions have been perpetrated by the CIA. But having said that, it would not surprise me at all to learn that the CIA, especially doing this to an abductee, because if an abductee is being legitimately abducted by Greys, then you could come in behind, you could be coming behind the Greys and pretend you're Greys, and the abductee would be very confused indeed.
Yeah.
Because they would never suspect that, here's real aliens, and now suddenly there's, the CIA. No, they would think that it's all the same phenomenon, because they're usually not entirely coherent for much of it. So I have no doubt that sort of thing could have happened, and in fact has happened.
And here's the last one for you, because I have to ask it now because you brought up the dominion of Adam on Earth. And the whole point that I have been seeing lately, the cluster of news I've been putting together, it's for a number of different reasons, but you're definitely one of the people that I want to hear talk about this, because of course it's your big publication a couple of years ago. This is right about it. The latest headlines on cloning, on so-called de-extinction. I don't know, as far as the whole dire wolf thing, as I said before on a past broadcast, people said, listen, it's a slightly genetically altered gray wolf. It's not really, but that is all just bells and whistles for the public. The real question is in whatever experiment was run, what data were they actually looking for that's going to be used in something else that's off the book? And
I think scientists are enthusiastic about bringing back some of the Ice Age animals, like the dire wolf, the mammoths. I honestly think a lot of that can be attributed just to scientific curiosity, to see if we can do it, and then to study these animals. I'm much more concerned with the experiments that are happening in secret, not the ones that are public. And as a caveat to that, there's experiments that are happening in secret and the ones that are happening openly in China. That's where they're doing some freaky stuff, is in China. There's no guardrails in China for genetic experimentation. Over here in the United States, we actually have a lot of guardrails. And you have to, I'm sure those.
That's why we were taking advantage of China. No guardrails. We did a lot of our own work over there in Ukraine.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. That's why we would have developed the what in China. It's concerning that there is a lot of advances being made in biotechnology, especially in the realm of genetic engineering and cybernetics, that are being ignored. And something like the dire wolf, because of its connection to surely the Game of Thrones and I believe J.R.R. Martin, that's his name, right? No, J.R. I forget his initials. What are his initials?
George Martin. Yeah,
George Martin. Rather, I'm conflating him with Tolkien here.
Yeah,
which one should not do. But he took a picture with the wolves and all of that. So there's a lot of hyperbole around this story as well. And yeah, I mean, it's if we can do that in public, if we can do that in view of everybody on planet Earth, then think about what DARPA can do in private. Think about what some of these military-industrial complex defense contractors, these biotech contractors, are actually doing in private. Yeah, in labs in China, in labs in Ukraine, in labs in different places around the world where the oversight isn't there, or in deep underground military bases. See, that's where I think the real secrets and the real Dr. Moreaus are experimenting, is in the deep underground military bases.
I'm with you, and that's why I'm wondering what is about to boil up to the surface, because the surface level headlines are just getting so much more bizarre. I brought this up a couple of times in the last month or so, because I think it also came out in March, but we had MIT put out an op-ed or an opinion piece or something like that on what could be, and this is why I said I got to talk to Timothy about this. They actually just called it bodyoids. They call it their brainless, soulless bodies that they say they could be strategic in the organ donation standpoint. But when I think about transhumanists, when I think about empty vessels through which something else can go and control, to claim a body, that they did not have beforehand. That, I mean, we were getting from the NHS across the sea about the synthetic placentas a couple of years ago, and then just 2 weeks ago we got the news about the first baby born in the UK by way of womb transplant.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things. It just seems like a big quickening to me that you would, as the author of Birthright, take particular note in.
Well, I predicted a lot of this in Birthright. I predicted that we would start to see genetic artificial wombs coming, and one thing I don't think I knew at the time when I wrote Birthright, but I know now, is that the sperm count of males in the West is going to zero. It's predicted to go to zero by 2045. So we know. I mean, the population geneticists know that we're running out of our genetic rope, and so these technologies are being accelerated, like artificial wombs. We are just seeing the very beginning of the wholesale modification of the human genome. That's what's coming in the future, and it's a scenario that's going to lead to what I describe in my book Birthright as a post-human apocalypse. That's where transhumanism is headed. And I think that a lot of the transgender stuff, by the way, is the preamble to a lot of the transhuman stuff. You can't define what a man or a woman is. Well, good luck trying to define what a human being is.
Yeah.
And it's all designed to get us to acquiesce, to relinquish the trademarks that make us human, genetic and otherwise, so that we can be forcibly, let me back up. Let's not use the word forcibly. So let's say so that we can be enticed into trading our birthright, which is to be the offspring of Adam and Eve and have dominion of the earth, for a bowl of stew. And that bowl of stew is going to be life extension and the remedies of the remedying of genetic disorders and the addition of remarkable capabilities from other species integrated into our genome, and Neuralink, the ability to interface with the internet and with artificial intelligence at the speed of thought. Yeah, this is the future. If you think that a direwolf is incredible, I mean, fast forward 10 years, 20 years into the future, and we're going to be seeing some really freaky things happening in the realm of genetics, because eventually the guardrails are going to come down, and the guardrails come down when we have cures for diseases. The guardrails are going to come down when we run out of genetic rope, especially,
Yeah.
and we need those artificial wombs, and we need to be able to create designer babies. There's going to be a real acceleration in the development and marketing of transhuman technologies, because we're not seeing the marketplace yet. No, the marketplace for these technologies doesn't exist yet, but it's coming. It's coming.
It's a great
you'll
point.
be able to, in the future, in the near future, I'd say in the next 20 years, you will be able to cure all kinds of superficial cosmetic problems, let's call them, like people who have hereditary balding, and people who have all kinds of cosmetic related, let's call them, disorders. Those things are going to go first, and that's where the market's going to open up. And I'm predicting that now. I predicted that in my book. You're going to have a market opening up, a genetic market for cosmetics, and that of course is going to come on the heels of all of the medical stuff, the curing of heart disease, which we're very close to doing that, genetically speaking, already, because so many of our disorders are related to the mutation of our genome. And once that stuff starts kicking in, it's going to move faster than artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to cure their disorders. Nobody wants to die of heart disease, right? Nobody wants to get cancer. Everybody wants to correct the cosmetic maladies if it can be corrected genetically. Nobody wants to be bald. I mean, the market is there, and it's only a matter of time before the genetic revolution explodes. And the direwolf thing is only the beginning.
Well, yeah, you're right. Nobody wants to be bald, Timothy. There's certainly that. But some of us just have to live with it and make the best of it, and hopefully we have a good shaped head, and that's as long as we have a good shaped head, and it's not
I'm
one of
not
those
that far behind you, brother. So
yeah, well, listen, you got as far as you did, then good for you. But you're right, because just right now, over the last, just this year, IVF has been a big thing, and that's still a very mainstream thing to talk about. That's been going on for a long time now, and there's nothing. It is controversial, as we have realized, from moral and ethical lines about how eggs are harvested and embryos are created and what is what's discarded and all that stuff. But what you're describing right here does seem like a pretty scary next couple of steps up when, as you said, we run out of genetic rope and suddenly we're looking at a world that perhaps reproduction needs to be mechanized. Go ahead.
Don't forget what the I'm going to call him the New World Order prophet, Yuval Noah Harari. Interesting that his middle name is Noah, by the way, is out there prophesying, predicting that in 100 to 130 years or 120 years from now, there will be no more Homo sapiens on planet Earth. And he's buddies with Klaus Schwab and all of those guys. So from the World Economic Forum. So it's this. I agree with him. I think we're entering a post-human apocalypse.
Well, with that being said, tell everybody about what's coming up in June. This was a fantastic episode. It's great to have you back on. NephCon in June 27th to 28th, talking about Homo sapiens and the lack thereof. What's going to go on here?
NephCon is a conference that I'm putting on here in my hometown of Bozeman, Montana, from the 27th to 28th of June. It's going to feature presentations on all of the topics we've been talking about today and more by myself, my friend Gary Haven, who I mentioned. He and I did a lot of stuff in Peru together, made some amazing discoveries. From Mike Adams, the health ranger. Many people are familiar with Mike. David Paulides.
That's going to be great lineup.
411 stuff. We're going to be talking about Bigfoot. We're going to be talking about alien abduction. There may be a congressman or two from the UAP committee who will be joining us to talk about things that are happening now in regard to disclosure. We're going to be joined by Keith Skiana from End Times Productions. He has a huge YouTube channel. A lot of people are familiar with him. Taylor Welch from the Deep End Podcast, and many other very interesting people besides. So this is really going to be a blast. I'm really looking forward to it. Bozeman, Montana is the gateway to Yellowstone. It's the perfect place to come for vacation, especially at the end of June. I purposely programmed this conference to take place at the end of June because it is drop dead gorgeous in Montana, especially in the Bozeman area at the end of June. So if you're into these topics, you want to come mingle with a bunch of like-minded people, come to NephCon. It's going to be awesome. Come and then go drive through Yellowstone. Again, Yellowstone's only 90 minutes away from here, or go up to Glacier National Park in the north. Bozeman, Montana, 27th through the 28th of June. And there is, by the way, a VIP event on the 26th. We're actually going to go to Sage Wall. Taking a group to Sage Wall, and we're going to be hanging out in the mountains and doing all kind of cool stuff. That is sold out. That's sold out very, very quickly. There are still some tickets available for the conference itself. VIP is sold out, but you can keep, refreshing the page to check if a VIP ticket opens up as we get closer to the date. I'm sure some tickets will open up. So come join me in Bozeman, Montana for NephCon.
They could find all this on timothyalberino.com under the events section.
Yes, but better. It's easier to go to alberinoevents.com, alberinoevents.com, and you can get tickets to NephCon there.
Well, this was wonderful having you on again, man, and that sounds like a great event. One day, I'm going to definitely come out to one of them, and I will then throw an event, and you'll have to come and be a speaker at one of mine. So we'll figure this out. All right, brother. Well, listen, have a great night. Congratulations on all the great exposure and well-deserved success and attention lately. Keep doing your thing, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Frank.
All right, take care. There he goes. Timothy Alberino.